Welcome to WLNM, the web novel and manga review, hosted by Zeke Changuris.
Welcome to WLNM, the web light novel and manga review, the podcast dedicated to bringing our listeners the artists and writers that are part of this amazing renaissance of creativity, giving us stories to entertain and inspire us. We welcome Timid the Writer, author of A Tapestry Ablaze, Volume 1. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, Timid, from the description that we have on your website and Amazon, A Tapestry Ablaze takes place in the American South during the mid-70s. I will say, what an amazing time, because that's when I was born, bicentennial child. So, how is it? How are you trying to capture the 70s, which is an interesting era in itself? Did you get the idea from Disco Inferno? Let's go there.
I did not.
Okay.
So it's funny you should mention, like, you were born in that time. I was a child of the 2000s, and because of the 30-year cycle, one of the big things in the 2000s was 70s nostalgia. And I love the aesthetic of the 70s, and I think for the story that I'm trying to tell, which is maybe a bit more in touch with nature, it just fits really perfectly. Anything past that, like the 80s, the 90s, feels a little too industrial, if that makes sense.
I can see that. Well, I can see that. The 80s has always been, was always looked back on, or even at the time, as one of extreme consumerism, only seconded by the extreme consumerism of the mid 90s with the tech, with the economy going gangbusters during the tech market. So yeah, the 70s, the 70s were not a super economic era for the United States. And so everyone did think, reuse, recycle, because it was a great, you couldn't get a new thing the next day. If something breaks, you fixed it. So yeah, I kind of get that. But now let's focus in, after the 70s nostalgia, on what is it a little bit about our protagonist. Tell me about how he fits into this world that you've created.
Sure. So, in this world, the big difference between it and our version of Earth is the presence of monsters and magic. And I sort of always wanted that to be a rarity. And so Ren and his family live in a very small town, similar to the small town I grew up in, where they are sort of the only people who fight monsters and have access to this magic. And so that sort of compounds with the isolation that he's feeling. And when he gets a chance to go to the Slayers College and be around more people who kind of understand and get it, he jumps at the opportunity.
Okay, so it sounds almost like in a way, let me go with maybe the nerd experience of, especially when you grow up in a small town and say you like something such as, I don't know, anime, that people don't necessarily have a word for, and you don't meet other anime lovers until you leave town and go to school. It sounds like a little bit of an analog to that for me. Is that like a theme that you're trying to get to, or is it just more of the way the story has evolved?
Yeah, I think there's definitely the theme of going to a bigger place and just meeting different kinds of people and carving out a place where you can sort of belong with that expanded population. Because I feel like you're sort of touching on your own experience of liking anime and then going somewhere else, and that was my experience too. And so his journey is sort of built on my own for that purposes.
Okay. Tell me about a little bit about the world building here. Okay, so we've got a mid-70s America. Monsters do exist. Now, is it like coming across an alligator here in Florida, or is it more of a they are ransacking the countryside?
Yeah, monsters are sort of a stand-in for intense wildlife.
Okay.
And so there's sort of a spectrum of how poignant and pertinent they are to a person's life. In a smaller town like Rennes, they're a bit bigger of a deal because, you have a very rural population and woods are everywhere and you never know what's sort of lurking in them. But in a bigger city, it's kind of an afterthought and you could go your whole life without ever really needing to know about them.
Okay, that's a really cool way of putting it. Um, because I mean, hell, you could fast forward 40 plus years and focus on how the suburbanization and the lack of wildlands have encroached upon nature and the monster habitat.
Yeah, a very early version of this story, like 2 years before I put anything to paper, was sort of serving as an allegory for how rural communities view the city as like rejecting and sort of killing off their way of life. Um, and I think that sort of evolved into this huge disconnect between like what is the rural experience and what is the city experience.
Yeah, and I hear that, and it's and I can see, and I have seen it because I grew up in the country and worked in the cities, and I've seen there are those who can reject the outdoors, the country way of life, but in regard, it's actually a symbiotic relationship. You can't have a city without the country. You can't have the two areas because you don't. If you don't have someone producing the food, you can't have people living in a city. Everyone's got to produce their own food, and so yeah, it's really a symbiotic relationship in a lot of ways. So, hey, now tell me, you know, going back to that, what was kind of like that first spark? Was there something that you saw that made you think, you know what, there's a disconnect between these two places? Uh, it's country versus city or city versus country. Is there something that kind of sparked that transition? That's something that you saw?
Um, I wish the story was that grandiose. It's kind of, I think, the dumbest way I've ever started a story. Um, I kind of figured out what I wanted the main character's power set to be
Okay.
and then worked backwards.
Hey, we all have our process. Trust me on that one. We all have our processes, and ideas come from the strangest places. So you wanted to have you wanted to have a cool hero. You wanted to have an interesting character, which character development is great because some of us are really good at world building and the others are really good at character development. And when you can do both at the same time, you've got a hit on your hands. But
That's the hope.
that's the hope, exactly. So, when did you, going back even further, when did you first begin telling stories? Are you somebody who has always told stories, or did you come into it later in life?
Yeah, growing up in that really small town, I was a mile away from the nearest kid my age. And I didn't like that kid. He hit me. So I spent a lot of time, sort of by myself. And one of the ways I would pass the time is walking around my front yard, talking to myself, um, and sort of coming up with these stories. And that was sort of just how I passed the time. And it was a good creative outlet. And so I guess I've kind of always been doing that.
Kind of like that power of imagination is the way to entertain yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, the number of adventures my brother and I went on, because our property especially butted up against the Appalachian Trail, and so there was miles of woodland, and the adventures that we would go on, from everything to reenacting the opening scenes of Raiders of the Lost Ark to, watching a World War II film, and then reenacting that. There's a lot to be said for that ability to get out there, and you're not just interacting with nature, but you're creating a world onto itself. And there's a lot to be said for kids who have that experience. Some say that they don't understand, how is it that I didn't have a Atari until I was 18. And I had my kids in class play these 2600 era games, and they're like, oh my god. they don't 8 bits, and all you do is move left and right, really? Like, yeah. And I didn't get to do this until I was 18. So yeah. And if I wanted to play a real video game, I had to go all the way to the arcade 30 minutes away. So
did you then have to explain what an arcade was?
I did explain to them. I did the conversion on. It cost 25 cents to play Pac-Man. In today's dollars, I'm paying $1 to play one game of Pac-Man, which is just insane if you think about it.
Yeah, it is.
$1 to play Pac-Man.
And that only bought you like one life, right?
Yeah, well, you could 3 lives technically, but you're going out quickly in the first one. You're just, so you're really only getting 2 lives. But oh dear, yeah, I having to explain, this was the epitome of gaming entertainment. Going to the Tasty Freeze and playing Pac-Man and literally listening to a jukebox that played records. I mean, because when you grow up in a small town, everything's at least 20 years behind the times.
Yeah. My the pizza place that was in the park near where I lived had old machines, but I don't think they had very many video games. They might have had like Space Invaders, but they must have like skee ball and that sort of thing. So yeah, it was very much 20 years old, probably.
Yeah, it's just like today, but 20 years ago. So what inspires you to write? What made you take that? Many of us think about, come up with ideas and think about stories, but what really made you decide, what, I'm going to put pen to paper and put my ideas out there?
I would like to say it was for some noble cause, that I had some story that I needed to tell people, but really I really like talking about my ideas and stories to people. And I realized the only way I could consistently do that is if I got the story in front of more people.
Okay.
My fiance doesn't have the patience to hear about all of my ideas all the time. So I gotta spread that around.
Yes, I can understand. I feel guilty. The punishment that I give my wife occasionally over when I come up with an interesting plot or something and need to tell her about it. She was the editor of my first book, and that took over a year of just systematically sitting down every week at coffee, and she would read a section and make corrections, and it would take us about an hour and a half each week to do for her to truly edit it. And I can't give her enough thanks and credit for being patient with me to do that, because my writing, though it has evolved and gotten better, grammar was not always my strong suit.
Yeah. The first thing I really wrote and edited and tried to put in front of other people, this was years before Ada, a couple. My now fiance, then girlfriend, hated it. She handed it back to me and said 3 out of 5 stars.
It's good when we can get that honest support, because if your loved one doesn't like it and gloss it over and say, oh, this is wonderful, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
So what are you most proud of in your work? I mean, is there something that you wrote in there that you're like, yeah, I hit that ball out of the park, this scene was amazing? Uh, is there something that you've done in that that you're like, yeah, I nailed it?
I would say fights. I am. I think I am best at writing fights. Uh, I sort of cut my teeth with writing on a um, role playing site that was based on Bleach. And so it was a ton of fights, and I really learned how to write action and make it feel engaging. And everyone that's read A Tapestry Ablaze Volume 1 and gotten back to me says they loved the fights, and I'm really proud of it.
Yeah, see, that is one of those areas that I'm definitely weak on, is the actual action in a scene, um, and it could just be my Quaker upbringing. That's why fights don't seem to work very well. But um, yeah, it's. I mean, do you feel that, do you like? I'm trying to think of the best way, but do you like to narrate the way it goes, kind of like more of a, you know, boxing commentator? Do you see yourself as like the commentator at the ringside calling the fight, or is it do you want to be more immersed in it as you're trying to tell it? Like, he throws the punch, I feel the air, I move to the left, kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely the latter. I have a bit of a penchant for observant characters who are kind of strategic fighters. And to me, the most interesting part of that is not what's happening, but why it's happening and how it's being perceived. And so getting sort of right there over the fighter's shoulder, the protagonist getting in his head, uh, I think it's definitely like very engaging and enjoyable, and my favorite part about writing fights.
Okay. Hey, so uh, now time for my favorite question. Do you write yourself into a corner? Do you ever feel like you've written yourself into a corner and you're like, how the hell do I get out of here? Because I just left myself with no place to go.
Um, Sometimes I think I will write scenes into corners. Um, I haven't yet hit a spot where I've written my whole plot into a corner.
You're lucky.
Well, that's the benefit of thinking about your story for 2 years before you start writing it, is you have a lot of time to iron out things. Um, but no, I kind of enjoy writing scenes into corners. Uh, I think it's really telling to put a character in a situation where they don't really know what they're going to do or how they're going to get out of it, and then you make them get over that.
So
Um,
you're literally putting yourself into the shoes of your character, uh, and putting them into a corner, and then being like, all right, how are we going to get out of this one now? So yeah.
yeah, I'll put myself in situations where I don't write for a couple days because I'm thinking, how would this character try to get out of this? And that's the most fun for me, is sort of coming up with getting over that, because I feel this such a strong connection to the characters in the world, because I'm, like you said, putting myself in those shoes.
So thinking about, those difficult to write areas, are you, and you said you thought about the story for about 2 years, so are you a plot, like I've outlined everything that's I believe is going to happen, or are you more of a discovery writer where you have the scenario and then you see where it leads you?
Yeah, I would say I'm definitely the former. Before I start working on a volume, I plot it out, outline it, get the roadmap, as it were. But I think if you plot things out too much, then you're not really writing. You're kind of just checking boxes.
Okay.
So I'll definitely get in a scene and then start doing discovery. Um, it would be, to keep with like the road trip analog, it would be like, I know I'm going to stop in, I don't know, Tulsa, but I don't know where I'm going to eat in Tulsa. And that's the fun.
Okay. It's a great way of putting it. Yeah, that it's kind of the hybrid between the discovery process and the plot and the hardcore outliners. Because I've interviewed some who they outline every little bit, and then some who are like, I come up with a scenario and then I just see where it leads. And both are very interesting ways to write. But I think, like you, most of us are hybrids in that regard, where we have an idea where we want the story to go, but we're not exactly sure how we're getting there. So yeah, I think that's a very very classic way for most of us to write stories, is by doing, you know, we know that, like you said, it's the road trip analogy is perfect. I know I'm going to go. I know I'm going to go to Baltimore. I know I'm going to eat crab cakes, but I just don't know where I'm going to eat the crab cakes from and how good they're going to be. So, so what? You said you liked writing fight scenes. So what? What authors have influenced your writing? I mean, what have you read that has been like, this resonated with me, this style resonated with me? Uh, what have you found?
Yeah, I mean, growing up when I was very much a child of the big three shonen series. So,
Okay.
Kishimoto, Kubo, Oda all put their thumbprint on me. And as I mentioned earlier, I cut my teeth in a Bleach RP site, and I would probably not be here if it wasn't for Taita Kubo's work. Um, so the fight scenes, kind of from all three of them, um, Oda's world building never ceases to amaze me, because One Piece is, in a way, so formulaic, but never ceases to be engaging, because every arc is come to place has problem, place has people whose problems we care about, solve problem. And to do
But
that so
he makes
consistently.
us a very very different and very different, very enriching problem, a very enriching place. Like, he does create a very good sense of world.
Yeah, it's, in a way, One Piece isn't one world, but 30 worlds that are loosely connected. And there's a few stinkers, but on the whole, amazingly done. Um, Other than that, I would say my favorite mangaka is Inio Asano. He wrote Oyasumi Pun Pun, and that's just the best manga I've ever read.
It's, see, it, for a lot of us, it really does, it really does depend on when you're growing up and what you're first exposed to, uh, on what ends up being your favorites. I heard someone say that with Saturday Night Live, the best cast was always the cast that was when you were in high school, because that's when you first started watching SNL. And so that's when you first realized, the extent that comedy could take. And so that first cast that you watched when you were in high school is always the best one in your mind. And I think that goes a lot with what you were exposed to. I mean, I am forever a mecha fan because of Shoji Kawamori and Macross. I mean, that was the first series that really made an impact on me, and um, I am watching Macross, still. So, and looking forward to whenever the next film comes out, or you know, what merch do they have, even if it's for a character that's 30 years old already. So yeah, what we seem to get exposed to as when we're introduced to something really seems to stick with us. And I mean, I know a kid right now, one of my classes, he's a 10th grader. He just started reading manga, and I think he's reading Bleach right now. And he's like going through the library and flying through all the volumes of Bleach. And I know that that's going to be like, his number one story, because that's what got him into it.
Yeah. It's almost like there are formative years, you know?
Yeah, exactly. No matter when we start into it. Yeah. Yeah. Your formative otaku years.
Oh.
Yes. One day, even though you're 30, you'll grow up to be a good otaku one day.
Yeah.
You know, expounding on the glories of whatever series happens to be great at the moment.
Yeah, and with any luck, you'll only get bullied for wearing a Naruto headband in middle school and not at your day job.
Exactly. Let's see. So okay, you love fight scenes. Let's move on to some other discussion. Are you watching Jujitsu-kaizen?
Yes, a million times yes.
So how you liking the fight scenes in this show?
That's so it's words are hard.
Great to hear from a writer.
Jujutsu-Kaisen makes me wish I knew how to write action better. Like I think that writing action is my strength, and Jujutsu-Kaisen still makes me want to improve at that. It also makes me wish my story was spookier, because the horror elements and sort of the dark atmosphere, I think, add so much to the experience that me taking a bit of a lighter tone, I'm not going to have. And
I get that, but it's sometimes it's about balance. You want to have that
Yeah.
lighter element.
well, I actually watched a really great think piece about Korean horror to go way out of left field. And it talked about how when you watch some Korean horror, you don't hit the horror aspect until like an hour into the movie. And it's because having drama and even comedy makes all the dark stuff hit that much harder.
That's a really interesting way of looking at that. Yeah, because you get all at peace and you're like, oh, this is nice and peaceful story, you know, and but it almost also is adding that. My favorite line from Alfred Hitchcock is, it's not about the bang, it's about the anticipation of the bang. You know something's going to happen, and so you're on pins and needles trying to figure out, when is that going to happen. Yeah, it's in a way that idea is it goes along with that, where you're seeing this nice idyllic life, and then, well, the shit hits the fan.
Yeah, like I saw the movie poster. I know it's going to go bad, but the question is how.
Yes, how
Yeah.
and when. Yeah.
On the note of uncertainty and anticipation, I just want to say Jujutsu Kaisen has mastered the art of a next episode preview. I think it's the rocky hip hop ish beat that they use, but I never fail to get hyped out of my seat watching that 10-second clip of like, this is what's happening next.
Hey, and I think they did a masterful job of, you would think that the big guy, you would think those two guys would not, from the outset, you're like, this is going to be an antagonist relationship. But all of it was rendered wonderful when he said, a girl with long legs and a big ass like Jennifer Lawrence, and they became brothers. I mean,
yeah, no, it's one of the first shows to really do that to me and hit me with that kind of bait and switch was Fire Force. I don't know if you watched, but you're introduced to this character Arthur, and in any lesser show he would be, a minor antagonist, like a recurring rival. But the series establishes, like, the first time you meet him, like, oh no, Arthur is a dumbass and we love him.
Yeah, it's truly masterful writing when you can do that, and you can make a character that seems so abrasive, and not in a sundry way.
Yeah.
Not in a soon way, but just is abrasive, and you're like, this person is going to just be bad news. But
Mhm.
you know, you realize that they fit in with everybody else there just because they're just a little bit off.
Yeah. And I think one of the great aspects, right, of that is how it plays with your expectation. We thought the big guy whose name is eluding me, I think it's Toto.
Something
Um,
like that. I can't
yeah.
remember.
You think he's going to be an antagonist because of how he's introduced and how he looks. And it's all playing on your expectation from what you've seen before. And I think that really adds to the masterfulness of the scenario is the author knows what you're going to think and plays with that.
Exactly. It really is. It really is great writing in that. And it took me a couple episodes to kind of get on the bandwagon for Jujitsu-kaizen, because you know I'm not into shows where it's a okay. I've enjoyed some battle manga, but where it seems like it's just going to be monster of the week kind of thing, just to me gets repetitive really fast. And to me, that's how it seemed to be marketed as. And but enough of my colleagues were watching it, enough the students in my classroom were watching it. I'm like, all right, I'll give it a shot. And then I binged 6 episodes, and I'm like, this is actually very good storytelling, and the animation is spectacular. um, some of these fight scenes, the number of movements and the number of frames that need to be done. I mean, 1 minute of 1 minute of animation is 2,500 frames. So these fight scenes with their uh, all this dynamic movement is just freaking spectacular. That's just from a creative point of view. That's just amazing to me.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the things that really sticks out to me is that unlike a lot of not necessarily its contemporaries, but its predecessors, Jujutsu Kaisen, as well as the other big spooky shonen right now, Attack on Titan,
Yeah.
uh, they aren't afraid to have, like you're saying, that 2,500 frames per minute and have so many people on screen at one time.
Yeah.
You go back and watch some of the old Dragon Ball Z fights, and it's always a one-on-one fight, and there's so much bolstering and posturing, and a lot of the great modern fights just have none of that, and it's really beautiful because of it.
Yeah. It really is. I mean, I don't need 30 seconds of in crouch position, blue flames, and screaming the entire time.
Yeah.
Yeah, before you attack. Yeah, it really is impressive. I really have to say with that one, it truly is spectacular with the way they've taken what would generally be, if you looked at the plot, a typical shonen battle manga, and then they've really done a spectacular job at creating something um, truly remarkable with how it is not marketed, how it is uh, distributed to the people, like how it is not distributed is not even the right word, how it is.
You'll get there.
Yeah, the final product that they're putting out there, the animation is really and the storytelling have just come together seamlessly to tell a really compelling story. And thinking of compelling stories, you have volume 1 listed uh, next to your title. So I imagine there should be a volume 2 coming out.
Yeah. I am actually in the middle of working on volume 2. I'm in the middle of a rewrite for my second or third draft. Um, and I'm really excited for volume 2. It's a bit more of a shift. Minor spoilers. Volume 1 is sort of an adventure. There's a destination in mind, and you have a goal and you're trekking to a place. Very Lord of the Ringsian.
Okay.
It's a lot of walking. Volume 2 is sort of like, okay, you reached your goal, you got to the place, now what? And it shifts almost to a slice of life story.
Hey, don't. Two is the secret number here. Okay, The Two Towers, best Lord of the Rings movie. Empire Strikes Back, best of the original trilogy. Every other Star Trek film, it has to be an even numbered Star Trek film, is the good one. So that second always has the potential to be amazing.
Yeah. I'm actually, I think it's better. Like, I think I'm less adept at writing slice of life than I would be at adventure, and I still think that this is better. Going back a bit to what we were talking about, I think sequels can be better and can really blow you out of the water because there's an expectation.
Yes.
And now you have something to play with.
Yeah, you don't have to do all that time with world building. People understand the world you live in at that point, and so you have more freedom to work with the characters, and that sequel really makes life easier for the writer to experiment with some things. Now, we have had some really stinkers of sequels, like the original sequel to Mortal Kombat, which was one of the few films I think I think that was the first film I ever walked out of, was the sequel to the original Mortal Kombat film. Because it was like, you went from Mortal Kombat, the original, which was an amazing Hollywood production, to the sequel, which felt more like you were watching a Super Sentai show on the big screen. So yeah, it was, yeah, you do have your occasional stinkers, but you are given more freedom because you don't have to explain the rules of how the world works anymore. So that does really help. And I really wish you luck with your rewrite there, because I know that at times can be maddening, because you're like, well, why the hell did I write this? And then start pulling at a thread, and then you realize, oh my God, that thread goes all the way back to chapter 1. So now I have to change this throughout the entire thing, because in order for it to make it work in chapter 10, it's got to also be around in chapter 1. And so it can drive you absolutely crazy. But the rewrite is a necessary thing. No one publishes their first draft. Just ask an English teacher.
At least they shouldn't.
Yes. Let's go with that one. At least you shouldn't.
I'd like to give a pair of shout outs. The first going to fellow light novel author Jerry Hines. His was the first original English light novel that I read, and had this huge burden of expectation, but really endeared the genre to me. And he personally has been so nice to me. We're Twitter pals. The second shout out going to Ian Earl-Kana, who just does a ton for the OELN community and really came through for me when finding recommendations to get me introduced to the genre. So you guys are great. Thank you so much if you're listening.
So we can follow you on Twitter at Timid the Writer.
Yes.
And find copies of your book, Ablaze.
A Tapestry Ablaze.
A Tapestry Ablaze. I was going to go with Ablaze Tapestry. That doesn't make sense. Tapestry Ablaze on Amazon.com. And if you're listening and you like what you hear, please share a link to this program and take a look at the other ones we have to offer. It gives us the encouragement to keep going and finding conversations with artists, authors, creators, industry pros out there. And click the subscribe button. And until next time, keep reading. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This has been a WLNM podcast.